What's up, everybody? Thank you so much for joining us for the Here's the Deal podcast. My name's Dominic, and like always, I am joined by my friend and co-host, Kyle King. Kyle, how are you?
Thank you, live studio audience. Glad to have you all with us here this morning. And even if you're not live, if you are tuning in as you're driving, if you're at the gym, you're cutting your grass, or you're trying to go to sleep at night.
Yeah. Or you're watching us on YouTube.
Yeah.
That's a thing. You're sitting around with your family.
Family worship time, maybe.
Yeah. And this is your family devotional.
Yeah.
Here's the deal for kids.
Little meat and potatoes after your dinner.
Yeah.
And so, here's the deal.
Amen. And so, Kyle, we have, it's been a crazy week one, start NFL football, but we're not going to talk about that.
Because fandom, check out the last episode.
Yeah. Kyle's a bad fan.
My team lost.
Yeah. He said a lot of same things, bad things.
And listen to my own episode.
And so, to remind you, it's just a game.
Just a game.
And so, we then had a great Sunday morning at church. Yeah. And so one of the things that we have been doing throughout the summer has been doing a series called Ask Me a Question, and where we talk through different questions that our church submits. And
a lot of good stuff. A lot of good summer.
A lot of great stuff. And with that has come some really heavy topics. Mm-hmm. And that's one of those is what we're going to cover today. We talked last week, this is a two-part series. Last week we talked about where life begins, mm-hmm. and
more specifically when life begins.
Yeah, and when life begins, and like how, like a theology of life, basically. Mm-hmm. And then this week was followed up with a sermon on abortion. Mm-hmm. And our pastor and your boss, and my big wubba, and Kyle's boss, Pastor Anthony, is with us today. So, Pastor Anthony, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, guys.
There he is.
Hey, there we go. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Woo. We're glad you're here. And this is going to be good. We're going to have this conversation. And yesterday was one of those Sundays that you expect to get probably some emails and get to interact with a lot of different people. And so...
yes, all into the spectrum. Yeah. Like there was also the almost like there's cheers and shouts. This is an issue that is it's very hard to be like lukewarm on. You're either
it's polarizing.
It's polarizing. That's a great word for it. Yeah,
yeah, and we're in especially a time of with our election and everything going on in the world. This is front and center. Like this is the running platform for the Democratic Party, mm-hmm. And talking through all of this in a way that you go...
And at the same time, not only a running platform for the Democrats, but Republicans who have made a part of their platform, Roe versus Wade overturned, and to stop abortion. We find many Republicans running from this very issue. Yeah. And so it's polarizing politics, but also, man, we're seeing on both sides of the party how this is a great divide and number one issue. And But we also do this. We also take this from peddling politics to realizing that this first and foremost is a moral issue. This is a God issue, for God is the author of life and death. And so we kind of put this back into the arena of who has authority over this. And this is a moral issue. This is a biblical issue. This is a God issue. And that's why I'm so grateful to be on the podcast today as a tool, not only for those who love Here's the Deal podcast, but for Connect Church as well, to invite you in on the conversation. So much I wanted to preach over the past 2 weeks that we just couldn't get to. And so this is a great format for us to be able to maybe ask some questions and to talk about this out loud, to further equip his church with ways to engage in this conversation in helpful, meaningful ways, and hopefully to continue that goal of raising champions of life and through the church. So thank you guys for having us.
Yeah, and having part of this be that we go, in a sermon, you only have a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
And so from the threshing floor of what has to get cut, we get to have some further conversations that I think are going to be beneficial for people who do happen to attend Connect Church and those who listen all over the country and world.
I was going to say, if you're out of context a little bit here, you can go to our website. It's infocc.org, And if you click on Watch Live, you'll see a full archive of all the messages that Pastor Anthony's preached all summer. So go back and watch the last 2 episodes if you kind of need to get caught up, and you can hear some of the arguments we've made so far about when life begins, and then this last week, when life cannot end.
And that's where the heartbeat of this whole conversation was to preach a message centered really on when life begins, which not only biblically but biologically, we make the argument that is at conception. And then also this past Sunday, yesterday, just to throw it out there, when no life should end, and that is no life should end in the womb at the hands of a man or a woman, that no life should end. And so it's just I know it's a passionate, it's a polarizing topic, but it's one the church really needs to be on the forefront of answering. We need to be involved in the conversation, and we can't be the most ignorant. We've got to be the most informed. We've got to be the most, more intimately engaged with this conversation as we do our best to be salt and light in a world that is continually being plunged into darkness. And so we get a chance to stand and to speak up and to talk on life, and we're excited about that.
Yeah. And so one of the things, and as we get into questions that you go, I wish I could have tackled this. Like if I was given the option, if I had more time and people had longer attention spans, I would cover this question. What would it be?
Yeah. And it would be really the lines that the pro-abortion lobby and those advocates of abortion draw when it comes to when life is valuable, when life is worth protecting, and it's all over the place. They'll oftentimes reject the argument that life begins at conception, or if it does, they'll make the argument it's nothing more than a clump of cells, or even in the embryonic stage, it's not really life, and it's not really life at 9 weeks when it begins in the fetal stage, and maybe it's not life until 21 weeks when that and they'll call the child a fetus, and we know that that's just a Latin word for a young child or a young baby. They try everything they can with their terminology and their language to desensitize, to remove. We talked about yesterday using euphemisms in order to draw our attention away from the violence and the brutality of abortion. And so they'll say, well, the fetus is not viable until 21 weeks. And they begin to draw these lines that are arbitrary and really get a little bit wonky when you apply that very same line, that very same ethos to a living person. For instance, a lot of the argument is that self-dependency, that what happens inside the womb, that baby is not a life until it's self-dependent. It can take care of itself. The only issue with that self-dependency, that viability argument, is that can follow a child for years after it's born. You can't take a 1-year-old child and put them out on their own, and they're self-dependent, and they're viable outside of the care of the mother. The child needs both the care of the mother inside the womb and outside of the womb. And so we're not, of course, and even the abortion lobby will not argue for infanticide at 2 years old, but that's where these lines get a little bit wonky. For instance, sentience, or the idea that a child is conscious, and when that begins, we know that in just several weeks into the pregnancy that brain waves begin to develop. There's a heartbeat early on within just several weeks of conception, and the brain waves, when's the baby conscious, and those type of arguments. I would argue, and not knowing exactly that pinpoint, maybe we should err on the side of life instead of on the side of death. But we realize that all three of us, half of our lives are spent unconscious in sleep. And so it's not morally right that if someone is killed in their sleep, that it's not murder because we're not conscious. Or say there's a tragic car accident and somebody's in a coma, but the medical community knows that maybe for a preset determined period of time, I don't know, maybe in 9 months you will wake up from that coma. Nobody's going to argue that it's morally right to kill a person who's unconscious and in a coma, especially knowing that person will be conscious at some point. And so these lines just get really, really wonky as far as when we go to the abortion debate. And really part of what the church needs to do is they need to be informed, but they also need to counter the narrative that is coming from the pro-abortion side. And I use that chosen carefully because there is a pro-choice side, and we addressed that some yesterday. But really, it's those that are really for abortion and are fighting to protect it and fighting to make it accessible and all of those things. They really draw these arbitrary lines that are really unfortunate that they do.
Yeah. One of the things I think of too is that when we're talking about the abortion argument, which is so polarizing, there's also the thing, well, okay, you know what? If you don't want women to have access to safe abortions, or you don't want them to have access
and there's no such thing as safe abortions, right? So we've got to be honest about that. When it comes to abortion, there's no such thing as a safe abortion because there's always a fatality, except for in those rare cases. And I had a lady email me yesterday during the services that she's the proud and loving mother of a little boy who is an abortion survivor and under her care. So there are some rare cases where children survive abortion, and oftentimes they are maimed and they are disfigured, they are injured incredibly by the abortion procedure. But man, she's adopted this boy, the joy of their life to care for him. But safe abortions is a misnomer. It's a euphemism, if you will, meaning there's no such thing as a safe abortion because there's always a fatality when it comes to abortion. That's the life of an innocent unborn child.
Yeah. Now, and we talk about this. One of the things I see, and I follow a few different Instagram influencers and people who are in the political sphere who love Jesus and talk about and go around and interview people, and they'll go, "How late can you abort a baby? Like what's the line? If 1 month is good, why is 9 months not good?" And and the politicians are like, they don't ever give they can't put a limit on it because of the people that they're pandering to. But the question I have too is that we talk about this all the time. What about the 1% of cases that you go, what about people go, well, you know what about rape and incest, which is, it's 1% of the cases, but it's 99% of what is talked about, as if all abortions or most abortions are because of rape and incest.
It's using the less than 1% of abortions performed in America a year to justify the rest. And so when you're talking to somebody who is pro-abortion and they jump to the less than 1%, I want us to deal with that less than 1%. But one of the questions I ask them, okay, well, let's deal with the less than 1% if we can agree on that every other abortion is immoral and that it's wrong. And they're not willing to go there. Right. It's really an excuse to use that less than 1% to justify all abortions at any time for any reason. But let's talk about the less than 1% of cases that deal with rape and incest in the life of the mother. And first of all, how heartbreaking this conversation is, the moral evil of rape and incest. And to me, I think a proper conversation too is what should happen to those rapists in large cities. And depending on your political spectrum, these guys are getting off too easy. I think, look, the argument of castration of those who are convicted of rape and the harshest penalty to rot in jail for the rest of your life. And there's even the argument of capital punishment that some put out there for rapists. And you go, wait a second, well, what a hypocritical stand to take when you're arguing for life in the womb. The hypocritical part of that is equating an innocent child in the womb with a convicted rapist, an evil person who would do such an evil act. Yeah. And so we find ourselves going, this is heartbreaking. It is a terrible and moral evil when it comes to rape and incest. But now, if a woman has been raped and she's pregnant, now we have two innocent people. Remember, we talked Sunday about Aristotle's first principle argument that when it comes to reasoning, that we must really start with that first principle, that fundamental truth. And we made the argument that first principle, that fundamental truth that we must begin with in this abortion conversation is that we should not kill innocent children. And now, in this horrific scenario, we have a victim and a woman who moral evil has been perpetrated against her. And now we have an innocent child who's as much a victim of this. And so we have two lives that have been impacted. And so for moral consistency and integrity, we've got to fight for both lives to live and thrive and to survive and to be whole and to be well. And that is very hard because if you were to look at an ultrasound of a child conceived through consensual sex and an ultrasound at the very same time of gestation or pregnancy of a child who was conceived in rape, and you were to look at those ultrasounds, they're both human life, and they're both valuable and dignified and sanctified. And my heart goes out to women who've been abused, who face this, and it is heartbreaking. But I'll say this: what grace and forgiveness must be extended. Yeah. The church ought to show up on the scene no matter if they choose life or not, and cares much for that young woman, that girl, as on the front side of that if she chooses life, or on the back side if she doesn't choose life. And the church ought to be really a hospital, place where they can come and find healing. Now let's talk about cases where the life of the mother is at stake. Again, we've got to dispose of the narrative that abortion is a magic wand that just erases a pregnancy or just removes a child just by waving of the wand. There's an argument on the abortion side that says, you're telling me you think a woman should be forced to deliver a child she doesn't want. And the realization is that abortion in all cases is a forced delivery of a child. A child will be delivered. If a child is at 21 weeks or above and there's a case for the life of the mother, there also can be a case made for that child being delivered via C-section or naturally, but that child can still be delivered and live. Now, in the rarest of cases, and I'm not an OBGYN, I'm not a doctor on this, but in the rarest of cases where there is a mother whose life is on the very line, what we have now are two innocent lives. And a terrible choice, a terribly hard choice, where again, we err on grace and forgiveness and what is impossible. And the church needs to rally around these women, love them, and be there and to support them. And this is, and again, we spend a lot of time talking about what are the smallest of percentage of abortions. But I do think it's important that we talk about it out loud. But I also don't think we use that small percentage to justify the hundreds of thousands of children who abortion becomes another form of birth control, and I think that's an important distinction, and so anyway, good question.
One of the other arguments that I hear often is as the Christians taking a stance for pro-life. We say from the womb to the tomb. Yeah. That's our saying, and an argument, and I think it's worth speaking into is, for Christians to be so, like, this is a big issue in the Christian, and rightly so, I believe. But I guess some would argue that if we're so passionate about the unborn lives, unborn children, I guess the argument is made, or the accusation is made, that once the child is born, Christians kind of step back off the scene. Yeah. That these children that aren't wanted, and we're forcing these women to have these children in a home where maybe they can't financially support, maybe they're not, maybe it's a single mother and the dad's nowhere to be found. Right. And then, so later on, and these kids have a tough start in life, and then it's like the church kind of disappears off the scene, or maymaybe they're even placed into a foster care system, and the church should step up and adopt every single one of these. Like, I mean, how do you respond to those arguments?
And I think so. A couple things to address. Remember, we're going to operate from that first principle of reason, that it is never morally okay to kill an innocent child, and there's some arbitrary lines here. I often hear that from the pro-abortion. In fact, there's an influencer that I listened to the other day, where she argued that abortion is morally right because even in America, the wealthiest nation in the world, that it is not a good environment for children to be born into poverty. The problem is who sets those lines? I've been on mission trips to third world nations and been around children and played with children who have very little to eat, nothing to hold on to as far as assets or material possessions, and some of the happiest children on the planet. So who determines those lines on what a healthy and happy child really is and how much money they have to have or their family has to have. I think we've got to be careful that should an American to establish those lines for the rest of the world, you know. I also think that as we talk about this, a lot of times abortion is morally right until there's this utopian that should exist but never will exist. It's never existed in all of history. And so if families are saying abortion is morally just until this utopian environment exists, then the truth is that then every child their life should be taken, because that is not going to exist. That is not going to happen. And so we now address, if I have an unwanted pregnancy, and can we go back to this, that over 99% of the cases where abortion is sought after and obtained is as a result of consensual sex. And we're acting as if we don't know how this happens. We're acting as if pregnancy comes about by walking in the bathroom and somebody slips and falls and whoops, there we are. But we understand this, that in consensual sex, that there's always the potential for pregnancy. That's why in God's design of sex, he designs sex to be enjoyed in that covenant committed relationship known as marriage between one man and one woman, in a covenant committed relationship for life, so that as sex is enjoyed as God intended it, that we have the foundation, we have the fundamentals in place so that when pregnancy does happen, that child can be loved and cared for. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations with our kids. Listen, there are choices out there. Yeah. Man, there's abstinence. There is marriage, how God designed it. There is adoption. And one of the things that we often hear is that abortion is morally okay because there's a foster care system that is broken. And it is. There's a lot of broken places. But you know what? I know a lot of foster parents who are part of the wonderful side of foster care. And we know this, that statistics show us that there are 2 million people in America, families that are willing and ready to adopt a child. But the regulation and the red tape is so hard. Whereas you could just show up at a clinic and get an abortion. In some states will even fund that abortion for you. Right. And it's relatively a quick process. Adoption, and it should be long and a little bit harder, but it's also unaffordable. To the day that adoption is far cheaper than even abortion is. But let's go back to the foster care system. It's broken. Children shouldn't be in foster care. But again, that first principle remains. Well, just because it's a broken system and there's broken parts to it, doesn't mean we should kill children in foster care. Right. They are valued, they are dignified, they're sanctified. But here's also a misnomer. The 2 million people waiting to adopt can't just adopt all the 400,000 kids in foster care today, because the goal and the aim of foster care is not adoption but reunification. So at its heart, the foster care system seeks to see families whole and reunified, and that doesn't happen all the time. But it's not like the 2 million can just adopt the 400,000, or that if the nearly 1 million abortions that'll be taking place this year, that those kids will all be forced into a foster care or an adoption center, because most of the moms will choose to keep their child and to raise their child, and prayerfully moms and dads will do that, and so there's a lot of straw man arguments out there. Now I think these are important, and as a church we must advocate, yes, life from the womb, but also to the tomb, that we ought to be there for moms to provide medical assistance, financial assistance, emotional and spiritual support. And by the way, we are doing that. There are pregnancy resource centers all throughout the communities. There are ministries, there are churches that love on these moms. And one of the things, Kyle, the argument that you have is, even if we went back to the Greco-Roman world, where they used to take their unwanted children and put them out in trash heaps or expose them to the elements so that they would die, Christians were known for rescuing those children and adopting them. Christians are far more generous than the rest of society. They adopt more. They foster more. They take care of mamas. And so I think that there is a way to try to justify abortion is to say that Christians don't care about any other arena of life except for in the womb. And I think there's a fallacy there. I think that is a straw man argument, and there are no statistics that would pan that out. We love life. Why? Because we love the life giver. Why? Because we see every life has intrinsic value, no matter how young, no matter how early in gestation, and no matter how old, and no matter the challenges of those as they age, and disease can affect the mind or the body. All life has value to God. Every life bears the image of God. so, man, we're passionate about life.
Yeah, that's good.
As we seek towards an off-ramp here, what are some, we can't possibly cover every aspect of this issue. It's so deep, it's so complex, so hard for so many people. What are some resources where we can point people, if you want to find out more information, what are some good places they can go to find out more?
Absolutely. As we answer that, I want to say this too, to the abortion wounded out there. We love you. God loves you. We love you. And when I used to work with a pro-life organization called Love Life, which is a great resource, who pray at these abortion clinics. And one of the things that God developed in my heart was a heart for women, not only those who are going in, that God would change their heart and their mind, but also those mamas and dads who leave the abortion clinic having had an abortion. We call them abortion wounded. And we know this, that there is a mental health crisis for those who've had abortion, that Planned Parenthood, that none of their resources are going to the counseling of women after the abortion. They're in it for the abortion. They are the most well-funded nonprofit in the history of the world. And they have a primary business, and that is abortion. But listen, the church, not only do we love those who are abortion wounded, but we want to be a part of their healing. We have doors wide open for you. And the guilt and shame that you may be wrestling with, because remember this, we're convinced the enemy is perfectly fine sending millions of babies a year to heaven if he can wound the heart of the father and if he can enslave a mom and dad for a lifetime. And so we're here to say this: the gospel is that there is forgiveness, and there's freedom, and there is life in Christ that we desire for all the abortion wounded. And so we love you, and God loves you. Some resources. I love this. There's some pro-life resources I love going to. Love Life Charlotte, of course, is a great way to get involved. The local Planned Parenthood to us is in Knoxville, and it's currently being rebuilt and will open soon. Yeah, it was burnt down. And so, man, going across the street from that place, there are laws that protect where you can go and where you cannot impede anybody going into a Planned Parenthood or an abortion clinic. But standing across the street, just praying for moms and dads as they go in and as they go out, and praying for families, praying for life. And there are some things. So Love Life Charlotte is very much a part of that. There's Live Action. Lila Rose, she is, she's an incredible advocate. She's a great debater as well. They have a lot of great information. Lozier Institute in Charlotte. There are a plethora of pro-life resources you can go to. As far as, man, I love listening to some debates. I love watching folks like Ben Shapiro and Charlie Kirk and Michael Knowles and Matt Walsh. They'll show up at these college campuses and debate students in what abortion's about. And listen, it's so good to hear debates happen. Now, if you are left-leaning in your political life, those names just cause you to cringe. But they have some great pro-life arguments. Seth Gruber's one of those as well. And listen, Lila Rose is fantastic. There's just so many. And I would say this: eat the meat and spit out the bones. Stylistically, I don't agree with all of them.
So they can make me cringe too.
Absolutely. Listen, and stylistically, there's some things I disagree with, but you can actually see these pro-life, pro-abortion debates happen in real life, and it's very useful just to be able to kind of sharpen and to focus in on what you believe. And just, I think this church, you have to be informed. Right. You have to be informed. Inform yourself and learn, and be willing to learn biblically how this looks, theologically, this framework of life, biologically, science and the Bible, biology and the Bible are they're together. They're in concert with this. Right. And so be informed on this issue and pray. And listen, one of the greatest things that we could do is we can pray. And I encourage you to do that and find ways that you can be involved in local crisis pregnancy centers. We partner with a ministry called Deeper Still that minister to the abortion wounded moms and dads, and they hold retreats throughout the year. Fund them, serve at them. If you've been abortion wounded, connect with those ministries. ministries and allow them to help you in the healing process of abortion. There's a lot of ways we can get involved, supporting maybe young moms who find themselves in an unexpected pregnancy.
Right.
Man, throwing baby showers, being that emotional support that they need, helping them to champion life as they make the choice to keep their child, to love them, and not only through pregnancy, but after that, discipling them and also providing ministry for their child to where we can love them and point them to the gospel. There are a lot of ways that we can be involved.
Right. And and we're going to put some of those links in the show notes below. Also a link to yesterday's message and all of that. This is an important conversation that's not going away anytime soon. It is a conversation that is going to be fought for.
And before we go, could you just show that one video? Recently, under the view of a microscope, the lens of a microscope, we were able to see the moment where conception happens, where the sperm penetrates the egg, and to see exactly what happens. You're seeing that on your screen, and it's just it's a beautiful moment where, as you watch it, God both celebrates and crowns conception and life with light.
Yeah, and this is, if you're watching on YouTube, we encourage you to check this out. But if you're not, you can go on YouTube and you can do flash of light. And at conception, and you'll be able to find lots of videos of this one.
And Dominic can probably put a link in there for you guys to see it. But what we're watching now is the moment of conception. Chemically, what's happening is their zinc is ignited, and there's light that happens the moment of conception. And what is beautiful in the dark places of the womb of a woman, inside the woman's body, there when conception happens, there is light. God both celebrates and crowns life with light, and that's just how he does it. He's just so good, and what is beautiful in a depiction we see on a screen is equally as beautiful to God, who is not only the giver of life, but the sustainer of life, who knits together, as Scripture teaches us, knits us together in our mother's womb. He weaves us together. He knows our names before one of our days come to be. He is intimately involved in our creation. And in any way, what a beautiful picture of where life begins at conception.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having the conversation. Again, these are tough discussions to have, and a lot of different viewpoints that come in. So thank you for helping speak clarity and truth and point us to the Scripture.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And there are going to be more resources and things that you guys can be a part of and see and look at. We're going to put a lot of those into our show notes at the end of this episode, so you guys can find that. And also remember this: that we want to be a resource for you guys as you guys are going through this journey and having conversations with people and fighting for life in a world that is fighting against it. And so we hope that this is beneficial for you. Share this with somebody. Share this with somebody who's abortion wounded. Share this with somebody who may need to hear it. And like always, for all your heavy conversations and topics, thank you so much for listening to the Here's the Deal podcast.